She cannot be my bride. Look at her, she has not said 3 words all evening. She dresses like a governess in half-mourning, and I am told she has neither fortune nor conversation nor a single accomplishment to recommend her. I will not marry a shadow to oblige my aunt." The Duke of Carsholt said it in the library, in a low voice he believed private, and he did not know until he saw his aunt's face freeze that the door behind him stood open, and that the plain woman in gray, the very woman he was refusing, stood in the doorway with a book in her hands, having come to return it, and had heard every word. Everett Marchmont, 5th Duke of Carsholt, was not a cruel man, though he had just been cruel. He was a tired one. His aunt, the formidable Lady Sowerby, had spent the winter parading eligible young women before him with the persistence of a general laying siege, and he had grown short-tempered under the bombardment, and tonight, presented with yet another candidate, a poor connection of the family named Miss Lucinda Vane, silent and drab, and he had been given to understand, entirely without prospects. His patience had simply broken. He had spoken carelessly, unkindly, and too loudly, and now the woman he had spoken of stood in the doorway and looked at him. She did not weep. She did not flush or falter. She looked at him with a perfectly level gray gaze and set the book down on the table with great care, and said, in a low, clear voice that had rather more music in it than 3 words all evening had let him hear, "You need not distress yourself, your grace. I have no more wish to marry a man who calls me a shadow than you have to marry one. We are, at least, agreed. Good evening." And she curtsied beautifully, he noticed distantly, far more beautifully than a woman without accomplishments ought to curtsy, and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click that was louder in his ears than any slammed one would have been. Lady Sowerby rounded on him. "Everett, you unspeakable boy. I did not know she was there." "That is not an excuse, it is an aggravation. It means you would have said it in any case and only regret being overheard." His aunt's color was high. "You know nothing whatever about that girl, and you have just insulted her under my roof, and I will tell you now, since you have made it necessary, you are a greater fool than even I supposed, and I have long supposed you a considerable one." "Aunt, be quiet. You will apologize to her tomorrow thoroughly, and you will mean it, and then perhaps the situation may be retrieved, though I doubt it. She is not a woman who forgives a slight, and I cannot blame her." And Lady Sowerby swept out after her protégée, leaving the Duke of Carsholt alone with the fire and the book. Miss Vane had returned, and a growing, uncomfortable sense that he had done something worse than merely rude, though he could not yet have said what. He picked up the book for something to do. He expected a novel or a lady's book of sermons. It was neither. It was a treatise on the classification of plants, in Latin, heavily annotated in a small, precise hand. In the margins, annotations that argued with the author, corrected him, and in 2 places demolished him, and the hand was not the author's, and the flyleaf bore, in the same small, precise script, the name Lucinda Vane. Everett stood holding it for a long moment. A woman without a single accomplishment did not annotate Latin botany in the margins and best its author at his own argument. A woman without conversation did not need conversation. She had simply, he began to suspect, declined to waste it on a room that had already decided she was a shadow. He did not sleep well. He went to apologize in the morning, as his aunt had commanded, and he found Miss Vane in the conservatory, and the apology did not go at all as he had planned. She was not in gray. She had not troubled, this early and alone, with the drab half-mourning she had worn to be inspected. She was in a plain morning gown, yes, but her dark hair was down and loosely caught, and she was bent over a tray of seedlings with a small trowel in her ungloved hand, and a streak of earth on her cheek, entirely absorbed. And when she straightened at the sound of his step, Everett stopped dead on the threshold, because the woman he had called a shadow was, in the clear morning light, without the deliberate drabness, without the downcast eyes and the flat silence she had worn like a veil the night before. Quite simply the most striking woman he had ever seen, not pretty in the accomplished drawing-room way. Something rarer, a face of real intelligence and real fire, alive with the work of her hands, and gray eyes that fixed on him now with an amusement that was worse than anger. "You are staring, Your Grace," she said. "Last night I was a shadow beneath your notice. This morning I am worth staring at. I confess I find the transformation instructive. Nothing about me has changed but the light and your knowledge that I have opinions about Linnaeus." "I came to apologize," Everett managed. "I know why you came. Your aunt sent you. You may consider the form observed. I absolve you of the necessity." She turned back to her seedlings. "You said what you thought. Most people do not. They only think it and are polite, which is worse, because then one cannot answer them. I would rather be called a shadow to my face than be pitied behind my back. So we are quits, and you may go and tell Lady Sowerby that the situation is not retrievable, which will spare us both a great deal of tiresome pretending." "I did not think," Everett said slowly, coming into the conservatory, "when I called you without conversation, that you would prove to have the sharpest tongue in the house." "You did not think at all. That is rather the point." But there was, for the first time, the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. "I was not being silent last night for want of anything to say, Your Grace. I was being silent because I have been paraded before a great many men in a great many drawing-rooms, and I have learned that if I say nothing and wear gray and keep my eyes down, they show me their true selves within the hour, and their true selves are almost always exactly what you showed me last night. So you have saved me a good deal of time. I generally have to wait 3 or 4 evenings to learn a man is a fool. You obliged me in one." Everett Marchmont had been feared and flattered his whole life, and no one not once had spoken to him so. He found, to his considerable astonishment, that he liked it. "You test them," he said, understanding. "The silence, the gray, it is a test, and I failed it." "Spectacularly." She said it without heat. "Do not take it too hard. Nearly everyone fails it. That is what I have learned, Your Grace, in 3 years of being paraded, that a woman with a plain gown and downcast eyes is invisible to almost every man alive, and that the ones who look anyway, who trouble to find out whether there is a person behind the gray, those are so rare I had begun to think they did not exist." She set down her trowel. "I had, in fact, quite given up expecting one. It makes for a peaceful life, expecting nothing. You have disturbed my peace by picking up my book, which I saw you do, and by coming here this morning looking as though you had not slept, which suggests you read it. Did you read it?" "I did. You are wrong about the author on page 40. He is right about the stamens, and you are wrong." There was a startled silence, and then Lucinda Vane laughed a real laugh, sudden and bright, transforming her plain, composed face into something that made Everett's breath catch, and said, "I am not wrong. You have misread the Latin. But I confess, Your Grace, that in 3 years no man I was paraded before has ever once argued with me about stamens, and I find I do not quite know what to do with you." "Then perhaps," Everett said, "you might tell me who you actually are. For I am increasingly certain that a poor connection without fortune or accomplishment is not what stands before me, and I should like to know how thoroughly I have made a fool of myself before the day is out." She told him, not all at once and not that morning entirely, but over the days that followed, for Everett found reasons to be in the conservatory each morning now, and Lucinda, to her own evident irritation, found she did not send him away. She was not a poor connection. That had been the fiction, arranged between herself and Lady Sowerby, who was her godmother and the only soul in on the secret. Lucinda Vane was in truth the sole heiress of a great northern fortune, orphaned young, mistress in her own right of estates and coal, and a name that in the north was spoken with more weight than many a duke's. She was, moreover, though she said this part flatly, as a fact she found more burden than boast, accounted a great beauty when she chose to be. There had been a season, 3 years before, in which she had been the toast of London, painted by 2 fashionable artists and pursued by half the peerage. "And every man who pursued me," she said, "pursued the fortune or the face or the name, and not one of them troubled to discover whether there was anything behind the 3. I was 20, and I believed some of them, and I very nearly married one, a charming man, a viscount, who told me he loved me for myself. I found out a week before the wedding that he had a mistress he intended to keep, and debts my fortune was to clear, and that he had described me to a friend, in a letter I was unlucky enough to see, as a tolerable price to pay for solvency. Her voice did not waver, but her hands went still. I broke it off, and I decided that I would never again be married for my fortune or my face. So I invented Miss Lucinda Vane, the poor relation, and Lady Sowerby, who thinks the whole scheme mad but loves me, agreed to present her here, and they're plain, silent, penniless, so that I might see how men behave to a woman who can do nothing for them. It is a bleak education, your grace. You are the first man in 3 years who improved upon a second look instead of losing interest at the first. Everett was quiet for a long moment. He understood now the full measure of what he had done in the library, that he had failed her test as spectacularly as any of them, had looked at a woman worth more than his whole dukedom and seen only a shadow, because she wore gray and kept her eyes down and could do nothing for him. The shame of it sat in him, and he did not try to argue it away. "I failed your test," he said. "I called you a shadow. I have no defense. I said it and I meant it in the moment. God forgive me, and you were right to despise me for it." "Yes," Lucinda agreed, "you did, but—" She turned the trowel over in her earth-stained hands. "You picked up the book and you read it. And you came back the next morning and argued with me about stamens, and you have come every morning since, and not once, I have been watching your grace. I watch everything, not once have you mentioned my fortune, which you do not know I have, or my face, which I have taken some pains to hide, or anything at all but the actual furniture of my actual mind, which is the only thing about me I have ever wanted a man to want. So you failed the first test. You are passing, at some length, a harder one, and it is the harder one that I have never yet seen a man pass, and I confess it is disordering all my settled expectations of the male sex, and I am not certain I forgive you for that either." "Miss Vane," Everett said, "I did not know you were an heiress until 3 minutes ago, and I find the knowledge changes nothing except to alarm me, because I had just begun to hope you might one day think tolerably of a poor duke who insulted you, and now I discover you are a great deal richer than I am, and that I have been falling in love with you for a fortnight on the entirely false understanding that I was, for once, the more advantageous party. This is very lowering. I liked being the advantageous party. I had planned to be magnanimous about it." Lucinda laughed again, that sudden bright laugh, and this time she did not seem to mind that she had. The mornings in the conservatory became, over that fortnight, the fixed point around which Everett Marchmont's whole day turned, though he would not have confessed it under torture. He told himself he came for the argument, and there was argument enough, for Lucinda Vane was the most disputatious woman he had ever encountered, and delighted in it, and gave no quarter. They argued about Linnaeus and about Latin, and about whether the new fashion for landscape gardening was an improvement or a vandalism. She held it vandalism. He had rather liked his own new-modeled park until she demolished it in 4 sentences, after which he liked it less. They argued about books, about which she was ferociously well read, and he discovered to his mortification, was not. They argued once for a full hour about whether a man of rank had any duty to his tenants beyond collecting their rents, and Everett, who had never given the question a serious thought in his life, found himself first defending idleness, then unable to defend it, then quietly resolving to ride out and look at his tenants' cottages for the first time in years, which he did, that very afternoon, and did not like what he saw, and set about mending, and never once told her. Though he suspected she knew, because she seemed to know everything. "You have been to the Western farms," she said one morning, not looking up from her seedlings. "How the devil, I told no one. Your boots. There is a particular clay on the western side of the estate. I have seen it on the gardener's boots. And you have been quiet and thoughtful for 3 days, which for you is a symptom of moral disturbance. I deduced you had gone and looked at how your people live and been ashamed of it. Was I wrong?" "You are never wrong," Everett said. "It is your least endearing quality." "It is my most endearing quality. You have simply not yet learned to endure being married to it." She said the word married lightly, and then went scarlet, and bent very hard over her seedlings. And Everett, watching the color climb her neck, felt his heart turn a slow and complete somersault, because it was the first time the composed and formidable Lucinda Vane had ever in his presence been anything other than entirely in command of herself, and he found the crack in her armor more beautiful than all her sharpness. "You blush," he said softly. "I do not." "You are blushing now. It is remarkable. I did not think you capable of it. You have called me a fool and a vandal and a collector of rents and never once changed color, and the single word married undoes you. I find that extraordinarily interesting, Miss Vane. I find it the most interesting thing I have learned about you yet, and I have learned a great deal." "You are insufferable," Lucinda said to her seedlings. "I am. You have told me so on 11 separate occasions. I have kept count. And yet you are here every morning, and so am I, and neither of us has anywhere we would rather be, and we both know it, and one of us is going to have to say so eventually, and I begin to think it had better be me, because you are too proud and I have less pride to lose." He came and stood beside her at the potting bench, close enough that she had to stop pretending to work. "Lucinda, look at me." She looked at him. The scarlet had faded. What was left in her gray eyes was the old wariness, but underneath it, for the first time, something unguarded and afraid. "Do not," she said quietly, "do not say a thing you cannot unsay, your grace. You do not yet know the whole of me. You do not know about the fortune, or the face, or the name. And when you do, you will not be able to help it. You will begin to wonder whether you want them, and I will begin to wonder whether you want them, and it will poison the only clean thing I have ever had, which is a man who liked me before he knew there was anything in it for him. So do not speak yet. Let me keep it a little longer, the not knowing whether you would want the rest. It is the sweetest thing I have ever owned, and I am not ready to lose it." Everett was silent. He understood dimly that she was protecting something fragile, and he respected it enough to draw back. But he understood, too, that the drawing back was itself a kind of answer, and that she saw it, and that they had come, without a single declaration, to an understanding that neither of them could now pretend away. It was the arrival of Sir Marcus Vane that forced the matter. He came in a great equipage, unannounced, on a gray afternoon 3 days before the county assembly. A large, florid, prosperous man who turned out to be Lucinda's uncle and trustee, come north from London on business and stopping at Sowerby to see how his niece did in her strange masquerade. He knew the whole of it, of course. He had thought it madness from the first and said so at length, and he brought with him news that turned Everett's blood cold. That a certain viscount, the very man who had once called Lucinda a tolerable price to pay for solvency, and who had since run through what money he had and needed a fresh fortune more urgently than ever, had learned that the great heiress Miss Vane was in the north, incognito, at Lady Sowerby's, and was even now on the road to press his suit anew. "He will be at the assembly," Sir Marcus said grimly, over Lady Sowerby's tea. "He has wangled an invitation. The man is shameless. And he will make his play there before the whole county, because a public courtship is harder to refuse. Lucinda, my dear, you had far better let me take you back to London tonight and be done with this whole mad scheme." "I shall not run from him," Lucinda said. Her chin was up, the drawing-room shadow was entirely gone. "I ran from him once 3 years ago, and I have been running in one way or another ever since, hiding in gray gowns, testing men, expecting the worst. I am tired of running, uncle. He may come to the assembly, he may make his play, and I shall answer him there before the whole county in a way he will not soon forget." Everett, who had sat silent through all of this, understood 2 things at once. The first was that Lucinda meant to reveal herself at the assembly, to step out of the gray and the shadow and stand forth as what she truly was, the heiress and the beauty, before the whole county and the fortune-hunting viscount, and most of all before Everett himself. And the second was that he was, without intending it, about to be tested one final time, and more publicly and more cruelly than ever before. For she would stand there in her diamonds, and the viscount would want her for them, and the whole county would watch to see whether the Duke of Carsholt was any different from the viscount, or any different from the man who had called her a shadow in a library not 3 weeks past. He rose. "Miss Vane," he said, and his voice was steadier than he felt, "I will be at the assembly." "I know you will," Lucinda said, and something in her gray eyes was almost a plea, though she would have died before she named it so. "That is rather the whole difficulty, your grace." The Viscount was already at the assembly when Everett arrived, and Everett knew him at once. A handsome, sleek, smiling man, running a little to seed at the edges as men do who have outlived their fortune but not their vanity, working the room with the practiced charm of a fortune hunter who has done this many times before. He was asking, everywhere he went in a carrying voice, after the delightful Miss Vane, whom I knew so well in town, laying his claim in advance, planting in every ear the idea that he and the heiress had an understanding, so that when she appeared he might step forward as an old intimate, and the county would think it natural. Everett watched him and felt a cold, clean anger settle in him that was quite unlike his usual temper. He did not yet do anything. He had learned something in 3 weeks of arguing with Lucinda Vane, that the most powerful thing a man can do is often to wait, and let a fool reveal himself and choose the moment. So he waited. And then the room went quiet, and Lucinda came down the great stair in midnight silk and diamonds, magnificent, and the Viscount's sleek face lit with a hunger he could not quite hide, and he moved at once toward the foot of the stair to intercept her, to claim her publicly, before the county, as his own. But Lucinda Vane did not so much as glance at him. She came down the stair, and the Viscount stepped forward with his practiced smile and his outstretched hand and his, "My dear Miss Vane, how enchanting too," and she walked past him. Not rudely. She did not cut him, which would have made a scene of it. She simply did not see him, in exactly the way the whole county had for years not seen her look through him, past him, as though he were furniture, as though he were a shadow, and the fortune hunter was left standing with his hand out, and his smile curdling while the heiress he had come north to catch crossed the whole floor to the Duke of Carsholt without a backward glance. It was the most complete and most elegant destruction Everett had ever witnessed. She had not raised her voice or lifted a finger. She had simply shown the man before the entire county exactly how it felt to be looked through, to be the invisible one, the one not worth a second glance, and the county, quick as such crowds always are, understood at once what it was seeing, and the whispers began, and they were not kind to the Viscount, who found within the quarter hour that no hostess in the room recalled having invited him, and who left before supper, and was not much spoken of in the north again. And so, when Lucinda Vane stopped before Everett in her diamonds and put her test to him, the field was already cleared. There was no rival left standing. There was only the Duke of Carsholt, and the heiress, and the whole watching county, and the question she had crossed the floor to ask. She stopped before him, magnificent in her midnight silk and diamonds, the toast of a London season made flesh, a beauty that had stopped the conversation of the whole room the moment she appeared at the head of the stair, and she said, quietly, so that only he could hear, "This is the other one, your grace. The face, the fortune, the name, all the things men have wanted of me for 3 years. I am wearing them tonight on purpose, so that you may see the whole of what you would be marrying if you were to marry me, and so that no one may ever say afterward that you were deceived. This is Miss Lucinda Vane of the North, the heiress and the beauty, and she is a great deal of trouble and always has been. The question, the only question I have ever cared about, is whether the man who fell in love with the shadow in the conservatory still wants her, now that he can see all the parts of her that other men wanted instead." Everett Marchmont looked at her, at the diamonds and the midnight silk and the magnificent public beauty of her, and he felt, curiously, none of what the rest of the room was feeling. He did not fall in love with the woman on the stair. He had already fallen in love with the woman in the conservatory, the one with earth on her cheek who bested dead botanists in the margins of their own books, and the glory before him now was only that woman in her finest clothes, and he found he loved the clothes chiefly because she was inside them. "Miss Vane," he said, and he said it clearly, not troubling to lower his voice, so that the staring county might hear every word, "you have the matter exactly backwards, and I am glad of the chance to say so before witnesses. I do not want you now that I can see the diamonds. I wanted you a fortnight ago in a plain gown with dirt on your face and a trowel in your hand, arguing with me about stamens, and I want you tonight for precisely the same reasons and not one new one. The diamonds are very fine. I am sure they cost a great deal. They are the least interesting thing in this room, and you know it, which is why you wore them to see if I would agree. I agree. Now, if you have quite finished testing me before the entire county, I should like to ask you to marry me, and I should like to do it here loudly, so that every man who ever looked at a shadow and saw nothing may hear a duke tell him precisely what he missed. For a moment Lucinda Vane, who was never at a loss, was at a loss. The bright, hard testing look went out of her gray eyes, and something far more fragile came into them. The look of a woman who has spent 3 years certain no man would ever want the person and not the price, and has just, in a crowded ballroom before the whole staring county, been proven wrong. "You would ask me here," she said unsteadily, "in front of everyone, knowing they will all say the Duke of Carsholt married a fortune. Let them say it. I know what I married." He took her hand, the hand that argued and dug and annotated, the same capable hand whether in a gray glove or bare and earth-stained. "I married the woman who tested every man in England and found them wanting and had every right to, and who nearly gave up expecting to be seen. I see you, Lucinda. I saw you badly at first, and I am ashamed of it, and then I saw you truly, and I have not stopped, and I do not intend to. Marry me. Not the shadow, not the diamonds, you, all the parts. I want the whole difficult, brilliant, magnificent lot of you, and I will spend my life proving I mean it, starting with this ballroom tonight." "Yes," said Lucinda Vane before she could stop herself, before the caution of 3 years could close over the word, "Yes, you maddening man, yes." And the whole county heard it, and the whispers turned to astonishment and then, slowly, to something like delight, for there is nothing a crowded room loves so well as a great match made in front of it. They were married in the summer, and the county talked of nothing else for a 12-month, and could never quite agree afterward on what they had witnessed, whether the Duke of Carsholt had married the greatest heiress in the north or the plainest poor relation in the south, the most dazzling beauty of a London season or a quiet woman who grew seedlings in a conservatory. The truth, which only the two of them ever fully knew, was that he had married all of these and had wanted only the last, and that the last was the one who kept the others in their proper and unimportant place. For the Duchess of Carsholt went on, all their years together, dressing in whatever she pleased and caring not at all what anyone thought of it, gray when she gardened, diamonds when it amused her, and dirt on her cheek most mornings, which her husband declared he preferred to the diamonds and meant it. And Everett Marchmont, who had once looked at the finest woman he would ever meet and seen only a shadow, spent the rest of his life making certain she never again doubted, for a single hour, that she had at last been truly and entirely seen.